Hi there, and welcome to Hey Human session on rebuilding connections. As always at Hey Human, we always look at things in a slightly different way, and this time we're doing it for a big topic. What's next for brands and businesses after the worst of the pandemic has passed? In this session, we are particularly focused on the rise of what we are calling a frictionless world, potentially created by new behaviors through the pandemic. We're summarizing this as brand dispersion, more of this later, but we're particularly considering the risks and the rewards for brands in this context. So, little bit of introductions. I'm Neil Davidson, CEO of Hey Human and Hey Lab, and I'm joined by Aoife McGuinness, our neuroscience consultant. We've presented at South by Southwest for a number of years on a number of topics. Obviously, we wish we were all in Austin now, but fingers crossed for next year. So, first, a little bit about ourselves, a little bit about Hey Human and Hey Lab. We started in 2014, and we're an independent communications agency based in London, but we've got clients around the world, particularly in fast-moving consumer goods. We are focused on brand communications, social, experiential, and neuromarketing. Hey Human is what would be described in old language as an advertising agency, and Hey Lab is where we use neuroscience to help our clients make smarter decisions. And that's in everything from new products and concept development to website design and content. And we talk about unusual everyday ideas, and that's our approach to creative based on our neuroscience research and learnings. And that's about balancing new ideas that engage with content with connective content. So just a little bit about what we are going to speak about today. So starting off with the rise of frictionless marketing and whether it is or isn't great with brands, how frictionless marketing has been accelerated by the pandemic, what we are describing, as I mentioned, as brand dispersion. We're then going to talk about the downsides of frictionless, how it potentially threatens the three key elements for brands connecting with humans: emotion, memory, and empathy. And that, yet again, is based on our neuroscience research. We're then going to finish by talking about managing the challenge of friction-free, being brand-free, and the solution for brands being what we are describing as empathetic friction. So, on to talking about frictionless. So, frictionless is great, right? So, we've been talking about friction as a concept in marketing since day one in Hey Human. Yes, we are a bit sad. But much wider discussions about being frictionless have emerged recently, and it's become even more relevant due to the pandemic and its effect on brands and businesses. And I think for all of us, frictionless living has become something that we've went towards throughout the pandemic, from avoiding face-to-face interaction to expecting seamless order and delivery services that involve little or no contact. And it's, fascinating that large parts of the economy can still function from our homes, whether it's production or consumption. And that was something that was impossible in previous pandemic. So some of these behaviors are now well established as habits. Christian Lemeux's book, Frictionless, Why the Future of Everything Will Be Fast, Fluid, and Made Just for You, describes frictionless experiences in a way as a mandate. And in 2020, Deloitte stated that 76% of consumers say they will now switch brand if a digital experience does not meet their expectations. And most of these expectations are in the context of what we describe as frictionless experiences. As a result, the brands and businesses that have been winners seem to have been set up to deliver these frictionless experiences best of all. And as we've all seen, this is particularly through digital. And we can't talk about digital without talking about Amazon. So Amazon's recently opened grocery store has given us all a further glimpse of a new aspect of this frictionless future, with till-free, frictionless physical shopping experiences enabled by sophisticated technology. Now, this is Amazon's first bricks and mortar retail in the UK, but obviously not its first globally, and it's enabled by its just walk out technology. So we're wondering, is this the next big thing for brands, businesses, or marketers, or even what they need to start delivering now, or lose out in the race to be friction-free in every channel? But on the flip side, 98% of customers say they are now concerned about their personal data and what happens to it. And in reality, is this the price we're willing to pay for our seemingly insatiable appetite for convenience and friction-free purchases and experiences? So frictionless, obviously a byproduct of brand dispersion. So based on what we've seen so far through the pandemic, as well as the current trend forecasts, we expect to see a continuation of the trend that frictionless experiences are a key part of: brand dispersion. The new distribution approaches and channels for products and services to where and how they're needed most, leaving behind lots of legacy gatekeepers and removing unnecessary friction and cost. Brand dispersion has not only meant that a brand's core value is being delivered directly to end consumers more and more often, it is also changing the experience of those legacy channels themselves and changing our lives. So as I said, brand dispersion is re-engineering every aspect of our lives. We've all experienced it, and we expect a large amount of these new behaviors, which have become habits, to stick in how we live, how we work, how we shop, and how we socialize. And because of that, brand dispersion is creating new marketing priorities. New strategies and actions are being expected of brands in reaction to brand dispersion. These include new brand partnerships to accelerate direct-to-consumer, more localized marketing, better facilitation in digital, one-to-one at scale, and just clearly being more useful. And that's got to be based on true consumer understanding, which is constantly changing. But on the flip side, I suppose some of what I've covered on being frictionless and the drive towards being frictionless seems to be in direct contradiction of some of these new expectations of brands that I've spoken about. How can brands deliver these new expectations but also be frictionless? And I suppose the question for us is friction-free in danger of being brand-free and therefore failing if it gets this mix wrong? I'm now going to hand over to Aoife to answer that question.
Thanks, Neil. So in a frictionless experience, is there emotion? We know that most of our decision-making is driven by emotions. We tend to make decisions by emotion and then we post-rationalize it with logic later. But it's not just decision-making that is largely driven by emotion. Our attention is too. We tend to bias positive and negative emotions over neutral emotions. So for example, you're more likely to see a smiley or sad face versus a neutral face. Our emotion biases negativity. We tend to give more weight to negative reviews and negative experiences than positive ones. And we also tend to see people who have negative things to say as smarter than those who have positive things to say. With that in mind for experiences, is a negative emotion better than no emotion at all? We know that when people are in a negative mindset with low expectations, there's greater opportunity to delight them in a way that they don't expect it, transforming their experience into a positive, memorable experience. This is also sometimes known as the service recovery paradox. It's a situation where a customer thinks more highly of a company after the company has corrected a problem with their service, compared to how they would regard the company if a non-faulty service had been provided. Now, I know this seems somewhat illogical, but it begs the question of how satisfying frictionless experiences can actually be. It's also been long known that experiences that elicit emotions are more memorable than experiences that don't elicit emotions. If something goes as expected and doesn't surprise you or disappoint you, then it blends seamlessly, almost forgettably, back into the background. For example, driving home. Frictionless isn't memorable. Another possible reason why frictionless isn't memorable, it is because it's lacking sufficient reward. And another reason, or kind of perhaps an explanation of why this is, can be through the effort paradox. And this essentially states that effort is both costly and valued. The greater the effort, the sweeter the reward. Over time, as humans, we have learned to associate greater effort with greater reward. So when something requires no effort at all, can it be rewarding? So not only can the same outcome be more rewarding if we apply more, not less effort, sometimes we select options precisely because they require effort. So in this context, can frictionless experiences be rewarding? Another byproduct of frictionless is the erosion of empathy. Less physical contact with people in real life weakens our sense of community and cooperation, and also diminishes our opportunity to see things from other people's point of view. Artificial empathy, or AE, is the development of AI systems such as virtual agents that are able to detect and respond to human emotions in an empathic way. However, technology is not there yet, and research shows that our brains react differently. We know when it's a human and we know when it's a machine. Artificial and human intelligence are not the same. Take, for example, other experiences in our lives that we tend to kind of favor frictionless over friction or empathy. One that kind of comes to mind for me is at the airport, at passport control. So we're all kind of used by now this, well, when we used to travel, I should say, we're used to having, the automated passport control, and it kind of saves time, you go straight through, and it's quite nice to see after a long journey. However, I had the experience that when I returned to my home country of Ireland and I was met with a faceless automated service, I was quite disappointed not to hear the words "welcome home" and a smiling face. So it kind of begs the question of what kind of experiences are we creating when we remove this friction? What kind of experiences are we creating when there's no empathy, when there's no people? Are they rewarding and are they meaningful? And this kind of brings us into this question that Neil brought up. Is friction free in danger of being brand free? If we don't have emotion, empathy, and it's not memorable, what does the experience even mean? We know that brands essentially exist in people's minds as associated memory networks that are built up over time through different encounters with brands. So they're kind of collections of colors, sounds, emotions, shapes, and imagery. And they're all stored as memory. And essentially, brands are shortcuts. They act as a heuristic to be able for us to kind of quickly access this information and make decisions when we're trying to decide on purchasing something or not. Communications then play an important role because they either interrupt or kind of build on these existing networks and either reinforce them with the new experiences and emotion. But if a frictionless experience isn't memorable and lacks empathy, is that what we want our brands to become? And will they actually be brands anymore? If we don't even notice the experience happened, if it's so frictionless that it lacks any type of meaning, what's the point? Aren't our most emotionally connective life and brand experience triggered by frictions in these experiences? Isn't some of the most connective marketing based on the friction of interruption that is then rewarded with a deeper connection that wouldn't have happened otherwise? This certainly seems to be true for TV advertising and experiential, where meaningful friction hopefully ends a reward. We personally don't believe brands can exist without friction. Motion and empathy are the building blocks of connection. So take the example of storytelling. The single key ingredient that makes for a compelling story is empathy. It is only through empathy that we're able to share into the story of the character, and we experience narrative transportation, which is the ability to kind of captivate our hearts and minds. This empathy builds connection. It is through this transportation that we experience the release of oxytocin that binds us with the characters and keeps us on the edge of our seat, wanting to see what happens. This is the kind of essence of what it is to be human, what it is to connect with people. And if we remove every type of friction, we're just left with nothing. We're left with a transactionless experience that has no meaning or kind of actual power to us as humans. The power of empathy lies in this connection, and we believe that empathetic content is effective content. And neuromarketing helps brands be more empathetic by helping us understand people better. So we can use neuroscience research techniques to get down deeper into what really truly motivates people and connects with them. And it helps us to articulate, discover things that people maybe aren't able to articulate themselves. So over the last couple of years, we've been working on this at Hey Human, and we've developed the Human Connection Index as a solution to this, to understand what really it means to be connecting with people and how can we measure that through indirect techniques. So we look at metrics such as motivation, engagement, and memorization to get to the essence of what it is to really connect with people. So I guess our key takeout today is about unlocking this human connection. Marketing needs to balance frictionless with meaningful friction. Frictionless will continue to be an important factor for businesses and brands. But after a year that many of us have been starved of the deeper experiences that we took for granted, marketers need to think about the roles of frictionless and meaningful friction, not just in marketing communications, but also in the role in the buying experience. Can the friction itself be rewarding, or is it a worthwhile forfeit for a greater experience? The role for marketers post-pandemic will be removing unrewarding friction and paying back the experience that we've all been experiencing for the last year or so. So if we were to kind of leave you with some ideas for today, this would be essentially how we can start to build back some connection with empathetic friction. So we would recommend doing this in 5 different ways. First, keeping it simple. We still believe in the power of frictionless to some extent. It's just about complementing it with other things. Stimulate the senses, so we know the power of the ability for us to engage different senses and what that means for engagement and reward, and how that can actually open up a lot more channels of emotion with people. So that can be both in real life and digital experiences, by using language, imagery, and other techniques to be able to kind of connect deeper and across multiple senses. The third point is around turning disappointment into delight. So as we touched on earlier with the negativity bias and service recovery paradox, it's through the surprising positive experiences that we complement into people's lives that are the most memorable. The fourth part is about novelty and surprise. If frictionless experiences are supposed to glide through life effortlessly without noticing anything, novelty and surprise can disrupt this, can add this interruption, can build that little bit of friction back in that will leave people rewarded. We love to have a novelty and surprise in our lives, and if it's done in the right way, I think people are really going to emotionally connect to that. And the final piece is around using compelling storytelling. We know storytelling is the most basic way for humans to connect with one another. And through storytelling, we can really empathize with others and share stories that connect on a deeper level. So this is our tips for building connection back in a post-pandemic world with empathetic friction. I hope you found our session useful today. We might have some time for some questions. I'm not fully sure. But if you have any questions, please hit us up now, or equally you can also reach out to us on any of our social channels here.
Hi guys, you have around 5 minutes.
Okay, great. Okay, I think I just saw a question come through. What is the best example we have seen of a brand engaging over the last year? Ooh, the best example, I don't know if it's hard to say, to pick the best out of everything we've seen, but I think, yeah, I guess KFC did quite a good job at the beginning of lockdown last year. They, unfortunately, they had really bad timing. They were just about to launch their Finger Licking Good campaign in the midst of a pandemic where we're all told to wear masks and not touch each other. So it was very bad timing for them. And I think they just pulled it around in a really good way. They kind of made a joke of it, but equally they kind of went on to kind of do a lot of social campaigns and empathize with people who were missing their brand. So they encouraged people to try and make their own KFC at home, and then they shamed people on social to say, like, what you've created is really bad, and we're going to open up again soon. And they did it in a really kind of like humoristic way. So yeah, I think they kind of really smashed it in terms of that human connection piece. I think they were able to kind of balance that empathy with also a bit of lightheartedness. I think we all probably saw, back in the summer, there was that was the show reel of brands who were doing the same ad of "we're here for you" and that kind of empathy. And although that was, had a time and a place early on, I think KFC were able to still keep with their brand essence and that kind of light touch of humor, and how they managed to kind of build that into something, a much needed relief for people in those times, I think.
Yeah, I'll go with a slightly different one. I think it might seem like an obvious one, but I think there's a lot more to it, which is Brew Dog. Now, I think some of you may or may not know the Brew Dog brand, but it's based in Scotland. It's been known for quite aggressive, it calls it punk marketing, etc. And it created a lot of cans, special editions based on political events, bad things that were happening as a result of the coronavirus, which, is great. But I would also say that I think the thing that people sometimes miss with the Brew Dog example is whilst they're doing that, at the same time, their whole distribution channel had crashed. So, they were, all the pubs were closed. They didn't have a D2C offer to speak of. And I think sort of 70% of their business went out the window straight away. So they did a double whammy with special edition cans, etc., because not only were they doing topical marketing, they were using it to drive a digital / D2C channel that hadn't existed before the pandemic. So on one hand, I think Brew Dog gets big ticks for doing that kind of marketing. But on the other hand, I think they actually, going back to our frictionless marketing, the need for reacting to brand dispersion, I think Brew Dog ticked it in lots of ways, and they managed to keep that tone of voice whilst, almost seeing their whole business fall over. So I think Brew Dog's a great example in lots of ways.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And I think for me that they were kind of winning in the humor space last year with the Barnard Castle eye test beer. That just
exactly. So they were doing Barnard Castle whilst they're watching like the sales being like 20% of what they were. And building a digital platform at the same time, and then using the Barnard Castle piece to get people to order online for the first time ever from Brew Dog. So, tick, 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 I think on that one.
Totally.
Cool.
Totally. Cool. Well, I think that's we're just about out of time. Encourage anybody who's interested in anything we talked about today to get in touch, both either through heyhuman.com or heylab.agency. As Neil mentioned, we are a creative agency based in London with global networks across the US and the rest of the world. And we also do a lot of kind of online testing at HeyLab. So we're still being able to do a lot during the pandemic. So if you're interested in finding more about our neuroscience research techniques, do hit us up and we'd be happy to share more about that with you. But yeah, enjoy the rest of your South by Southwest and UK House experience, and hope to talk to some of you again soon.
Thanks very much.